Hello, welcome to Open Assessment Days 2020 here at Clark Atlanta University. My name is Mr. Christopher Seavey, and I'm the Executive Director of Assessment and Institutional Effectiveness here at the university. And today what we'd like to accomplish in this brief review is a summary of steps 4, 5, and 6 of our annual assessment improvement process. At this point in our academic term, you most likely have already completed steps 1, 2, and 3, but now we want to take a look at the second half, or what we call phase 2 of that process. And today I'm just going to title our comments Closing the Assessment Loop, because when we talk about step 4, 5, and 6, we want to finish the assessment process. We want to close that loop by collecting and analyzing our assessment data, executing improvement action plans, and reporting those findings and documenting them. So as a visual reminder, here at Clark Atlanta, we have a 6-step annual assessment improvement process. Steps 1, 2, and 3 have already been completed as part of phase 1 in the fall of our academic term. And now phase 2, steps 4, 5, and 6, we want to make sure that we're collecting and analyzing data in step 4, planning and executing improvement actions in step 5, and then closing that loop by reporting and documenting those findings. So let's take a look at a brief review of this material. In step 4, when we're talking about collecting and analyzing data, two things that we want to take a look at is what data should I be collecting and how much of that data do I need? And then the process of taking that data and analyzing it in such a way to gain meaningful insight from it. When we ask the question, what type of data should I be collecting in step 4, it usually is the results or the findings or whatever has been produced, the scores maybe, of the assessment measures, those assignments or those tools that you're using to assess and evaluate the degree to which your students have learned the program learning outcomes. So if you take a direct measure, say a standardized exam or a test or a portfolio writing assignment, you're going to take the results of those, the products of those, and use that as your data source. If you're using indirect measures, then you're going to have indirect indicators such as survey results or interview responses or maybe journal reflections from your students, maybe an exit interview or a satisfaction survey. What you're going to do is you're going to have a collection of comments as sources for your data. So fundamentally, what data are you looking to collect in step 4? You're looking for the results, the products, the scores, the findings from the assessment measures that you selected in step 2 to use to evaluate how well your students have learned those learning outcomes. Another way to take a look at what data should be collected is every program learning outcome has an underlying question. So if the chemistry department want to ensure that their students will be able to identify, formulate, and solve integrative chemistry problems, well, that underlying question is, can our students solve those problems? So what can we use to measure the success or the achievement of those students in being able to solve those problems? Well, maybe it's just the scores, the embedded test question scores of tests, quizzes, or coursework that our students have completed. That's the data that you're looking to collect. But then the second question with regard to step 4 is simply how much data, right? How much data? I'm asked that question so often. And I would love to give you a simple answer that's quantitative, like you need 2 or 4 pieces of evidence or 10 sources of data. It just doesn't work that way. Fundamentally, when I'm asked the question, how much evidence do you need to substantiate that student learning has occurred? The answer is enough. Enough. You are the subject matter expert in your field. You will know and you will be confident when you have enough information, enough data that will support the claim that your students have achieved or gained that learning outcome. So one way to take a look at how much data as having enough evidence is whether you've chosen to use a single measure or multiple measures. If you use a single measure and that produces a single indicator, remember that one measure needs to be direct. And I would recommend and suggest that whenever possible, if you're using one measure that produces one set of indicators, use an indicator that requires demonstration of multiple curricular outcomes, say something like a capstone event or a final thesis project or a co-op or a field work, or an internship, a practicum, something like that, that in achieving that final capstone experience, they have to demonstrate multiple curricular outcomes that they have learned over the span of their program. That's a really great source of information. If you're using multiple measures and you have multiple indicators as sources of your data, then just make sure that you have at least one direct indicator, one direct measure, and then any additional measures that you use can be either direct or indirect. And once again, all the products, the results, the scores of those measures is your data source. Fundamentally, I say it this way: what we're looking for when you're collecting data, and do you have enough, is do you have evidence that supports the claim that your students have learned that outcome? I say it this way: all evidence is data, but not all data is evidence. We want you to be able to persuade, to convince, to defend, to demonstrate to anyone who's asking that question, such as a regional accreditor, here is my evidence that supports the claim that my students have achieved this program learning outcome. Well, once you collect that data, we need to do something with it, right? And fundamentally, what we're doing here is we want to find out what meaningful insights we can learn from the collection of data that we have in our hands. So I use the metaphor of vision, of looking at the data. I say the goal here is to look at the data and find meaning in it. I say it this way: every data set tells a story. So fundamentally, you're asking yourself the question, once I've collected this data, what story does that information tell me about the degree to which my students have learned these outcomes? Well, if you're going to take a look at that data and analyze it, I would suggest maybe using one or a combination of four practices of analysis. The first thing you might do is just make a mathematical calculation, perform some type of calculation with regard to the data that you have. Maybe calculate a mean, a median, a mode, percentage, frequency, or range. What you're looking for is what product, right, in terms of what calculation, produces you the best evidence to support the claim that your students have learned that outcome. So it may be any number of different calculations from the data set that you have. Another practice you might use is surveying the comments that you've received and collected from your students. If you're using an indirect measure, a qualitative measure, such as a survey or a satisfaction response or an interview or a focus group, something like that, that relies on the opinions or perceptions of your students, then what you want to do is you want to survey all of those comments and look at the words, look for themes. What opinions are they sharing? What are their perceptions? What are their responses? And when you're looking at that collection, what you're really trying to do is you're looking for themes, looking for patterns, looking for things that repeat or recur in those collection of comments. That can be very powerful and very telling and very insightful as to the story that information is telling you when you're just taking a look at the comments that your students provide you. Another thing you might do in terms of surveying those comments is not only look at what they've said, but look at what they haven't said. Is there something that's glaring, that's missing, that you expected your students to provide in terms of their responses, and yet it is absent? That can be a very powerful story too in terms of the message that you can learn from analyzing your data. A third practice is making comparisons, taking the data set that you have and comparing it to another marker, maybe say previous students' performances, or maybe program or institutional benchmarks or standards, maybe a nationalized standard for comparison. Any way that you can make a comparison of the data set that you have that gains you insight into how well your students have learned and achieved those learning outcomes is a great practice to engage in terms of analyzing your data. And then finally, another way you can analyze your data is simply to draw conclusions, right? You want to identify the needs and form reasoned judgments that lead to decisions and actions that help your students, not only presently, but in the future, learn those outcomes to greater degrees, to greater extents, so that their student experience can be improved and just be tremendously effective. So once you've collected and analyzed your data in step 4, then we want to move to step 5, which is planning and executing those improvement actions. And here I just want to focus on a couple things. Number one, adjustments are very powerful in terms of leading to improvement, just slight adjustments. And then fundamentally, we're offering a couple tools for you that might help you complete your assessment and improvement action plan. What I've learned from my experience in higher education is that oftentimes once you've collected and analyzed the data and you have a story to tell about the experience of your students and how well they've learned, or maybe in ways in which they've fallen short of your hopes and desires and expectations for them, fundamentally what can happen is you can make the slightest, smallest adjustment that might have dramatic impact on the outcome. And in 3 ways, I've seen minor adjustments, just small adjustments, have significant impact. The areas of pedagogy, maybe you might make a slight adjustment in terms of curriculum, what's taught, or the method in which it's taught, or maybe the techniques that your professors utilize in the classroom. Or maybe you might make an adjustment with regard to the measurement, the assessment tools, the assignments that you use, maybe written assessments or oral exams or competency-based assessments and assignments that maybe call for recall, or maybe even your grading method, making a slight adjustment from, say, a 100% percentage range grading to maybe a point system or something of that nature. Making a slight adjustment that way can have significant impact in terms of how you know how well your students have learned those outcomes. Or maybe make a slight adjustment with regard to frequency or length or placement, format, parameters within the structure of your curriculum, say your scope and sequence or your course sequence, or your curriculum map. Maybe something needs to be introduced earlier in terms of the placement. Maybe something needs to be repeated so that they have more opportunity to learn something to a greater degree because they've covered it more times than what you have in the past. One of the tools that I will provide for you on our website is just simply a brainstorming tool of 150 instructional methods and activities that you might be able to use to maybe spark interest in your mind of maybe a slight adjustment with regard to the pedagogy in terms of the type of assessments and measures that you use in a course to gain the best information you possibly can in terms of how well your students are learning those outcomes. So once again, I'll put that on our website for you to access if you might find that helpful. So once we have taken a look at step 5 in terms of wanting to come up with a plan in terms of making those adjustments, those slight adjustments to see improvement in your students' experience, we want to capture that in some way. And here's where we're asking you to design, in a sense, to create an assessment and improvement action plan. Now what we've done is we've provided a couple tools for you that might help you capture this information. In previous years, our university has provided you an assessment improvement action plan form that looks like this. You can fill this out and complete it with the outcome and the planned action step, your time frame, and then how you're going to implement that or who's going to be responsible to implement that. You can produce that in terms of that form, but there's another form that I have created that might be helpful. And I just want you to know that I've made some updates to the form that you just saw by simply putting the same information into new titles and new positions that might help you later on down the road in terms of creating your action plan when we get to step 6. This new form has blue hyperlink items, and they're grouped into red sections for a reason for your reporting purposes when we get to the step 6 process. So let me show you that form as well. And once again, I'll make this available to you on our website so that you can make use of it if you so choose. Once again, this is not mandatory, not required, but it's just a tool that I'm providing to you that might be of help. So here's the new assessment improvement action plan form that might be of help to you. And you can see there are certain links that I've created that if you just click on them, there are pre-populated lists that you can choose from. So if you're doing an action plan for the English department, you can select that. If you're talking about a bachelor's program, you can come over here to the program box and select the Bachelor of Arts program for that degree. You can click on a date, and you can see where I can just populate today's date or whatever the date is that I'm using for that action plan. And then each box below is interactive. You can insert your text or, once again, select a hyperlink to select your answer. And let me explain why I've created that form for you as well. Because once we get through step 5 of deciding on what adjustments and decisions we're going to make in terms of creating this action plan, then we get to step 6, the final step where we're going to close the loop. And this is where we're going to report and document those findings. And fundamentally, what we're asking you to do is enter your findings and your plan into the improved assessment management system that we have here at Clark Atlanta University. So let me show you what we're doing with that. In phase 2, right, steps 4, 5, and 6, what I've done is I've created a quick reference guide that gives you step-by-step instructions and numerically sequenced visual cues that take you right through the upload process in terms of putting your information into the improved system. Let me show you that guide that once again I will put on our website that you'll have access to and you can pull down and use. And it's just simply called the Academic Program Assessment Plan Phase 2 Quick Reference Guide. But as you take a look at it, what you'll see is I've cued it to the screens that you will see when you log into the Improved Assessment Management System. And I've given you step-by-step visual cues of how to fill out your assessment plan and your report by using the improved platform. You'll go to your screen 1 and you'll go right through the first 3 steps, and then you'll click into screen 2 and once again follow the steps on the left hand side that are sequenced numerically with their visual cues on the screenshots on the right hand side. So if you take this guide and just follow it step by step, you will have everything you need to fill out your report in the improved database. And once again, if you go back to that form that I've provided for you, if you choose to use this, every single block, if you input the data here on the form, it will be exactly a cut and paste and drop it right into the improved platform when you go to the screen. So that's what we've provided for you. If it helps, great. If not, then that's fine too. Just want to be of help and service to you so that you can report and document your findings in the best, easy, most efficient possible way. That is a brief summary of steps 4, 5, and 6 of our annual assessment improvement process here at Clark Atlanta University, entitled Closing the Assessment Loop, Collecting and Analyzing Assessment Data, Executing Improvement Action Plans, and Reporting Your Findings. If you have any questions or would like to see other resources that we have available, just go to our website in terms of the Office of Planning, Assessment, and Research. Click on the page for institutional assessment, and there will be a link there for trainings and workshops, and you'll find all the resources as well as this video to refer to as you complete the loop this year at Clark Atlanta University.